The sun was just beginning to rise over the rolling hills of Willow Creek, casting a golden glow over the sprawling farmland. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the occasional lowing of cattle. It was a peaceful morning, the kind that made you grateful to live in the countryside. But that peace was about to be shattered. A high-pitched shriek tore through the quiet, followed by an unmistakable thud. The birds that had been pecking at the ground scattered in a flurry of wings, and a few cows lifted their heads, chewing lazily, as if they had seen it all before. And then, there she was, sprawled in a tangled heap of hay, designer sunglasses askew on her face, a shattered phone just inches from her outstretched hand, and the undeniable imprint of Duke's hoof on the back of her pristine white yoga pants. Duke, my trusty mule, stood nearby, chewing on a mouthful of hay with an expression that could only be described as smug. He had a way of dealing with intruders, and this woman, let's call her Tiffany, had just learned that lesson the hard way. But let me back up and tell you how we got here. It all started about a week ago when I first noticed an unfamiliar car driving past my property. It was a sleek, black SUV, the kind that screamed city dweller. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if the driver was scoping out the place. Living in a small town like Willow Creek, I knew every truck, tractor, and car that regularly rumbled down the road. But this one stuck out like a sore thumb. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just some lost tourist trying to find their way to the nearby hiking trails. But then the car kept coming back, every morning, like clockwork. It would cruise by, pause near my barn, and then disappear down the road. My neighbor, Old Man Jenkins, had a theory. She's one of them social media folks, he said, spitting a sunflower seed into the dirt. Come to take one of them fancy pictures and pretend she's some farm queen. Probably looking for a rustic aesthetic or whatever nonsense they call it these days. I chuckled at the thought, but didn't give it much weight. That is, until the car didn't just pass by one morning. I stepped onto my porch with my coffee, only to find the very same SUV parked near my fence. The driver, a woman with overly highlighted hair, designer boots that had clearly never touched a patch of dirt before, and sunglasses too large for her face, was walking toward my barn like she owned the place. I set my mug down, watching as she moved with the confidence of someone who believed fences and private property signs were merely suggestions. She held her phone up in front of her, smiling, angling herself for a selfie. Then, as if stepping into a dream world she had conjured in her head, she twirled in a slow circle, her arms stretched out like she was some kind of farm goddess. That was my cue. I took my time walking down to meet her, boots crunching against the gravel. She was too busy adjusting her hair and snapping pictures to notice me until I was standing just a few feet away. When she finally did, she let out a tiny yelp, placing a hand over her chest as if I had startled her from a deep meditation. "Oh, hello there," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This place is so adorable. I just had to get a few pictures." I glanced at the no trespassing sign she had so gracefully ignored. "You realize this is private property, right?" She waved a manicured hand in the air like she was swatting away a fly. "Oh, it's just a barn. I mean, come on, it's so picturesque. You should really consider opening it up for visitors. Do you even understand how Instagrammable this place is?" Before I could respond, she gasped and pointed. "Oh my gosh, is that a mule? That is so cute. What's his name?" I followed her gaze to Duke, my old, grumpy mule, who was standing by the barn door, chewing on some hay with an expression that screamed, "Not this again." "That's Duke," I said, "and he doesn't like strangers." But Tiffany, because by this point, there was no doubt in my mind that this woman was a full-fledged Tiffany, was already marching toward Duke with her phone raised. "Oh, I have to get a picture with him. The lighting is just perfect right now." I opened my mouth to warn her again, but she was already leaning over the stall, flipping her hair, and puckering her lips in what I assumed was her best attempt at a seductive farm girl look. Duke, unimpressed, flicked his ears. His patience was thinning. "You really shouldn't," I started, but it was too late. The camera flash went off. Duke's ears pinned back. Tiffany giggled, angling herself closer. "Just one more," she said. She never finished that sentence. In a blur of movement that could have been mistaken for divine intervention, Duke turned, lifted his hind legs, and let loose. Tiffany didn't just stumble, she flew. One second, she was standing there, grinning at her phone screen. The next, she was airborne, limbs flailing, before landing with an earth-shaking thud into the nearest hay pile. Silence. Then came the scream, a mix of horror, disbelief, and pure, unfiltered outrage. You. She sputtered, scrambling to sit up, hay sticking to her hair and clothes like nature's version of glitter. Your stupid mule just kicked me. Mule, I corrected, taking a slow sip of my coffee. And you were on his property, flashing lights in his face. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Are you kidding me right now? Do you have any idea who I am? I shrugged. Nope. I'm an influencer, she shrieked, as if the word itself was supposed to carry weight. I have thousands of followers. Do you know how much damage this is going to do to my brand? I could have been seriously hurt. I glanced at Duke, who had already gone back to his hay, unbothered. Doesn't look like Duke gives a damn. She let out a strangled sound of frustration and scrambled for her phone. The screen was shattered, but that didn't stop her from jabbing at it furiously. Oh, just you wait. I'm going to post about this. My fans will hear about this. You'll be canceled so fast you won't even know what hit you. I chuckled, shaking my head. You go ahead and do that. Tiffany pushed herself up, dusting hay off her ridiculous outfit. And you better believe I'm calling the authorities. This is animal negligence. Your mule is dangerous. I tipped my hat, barely containing my amusement. Be my guest. Just make sure to tell them why you were trespassing in the first place. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a split second, she actually seemed to realize how ridiculous she sounded. But then, true to her nature, she lifted her chin, let out a dramatic huff, and stomped off toward her car, muttering under her breath. As she drove away in a trail of dust, I turned back to Duke. Good work, buddy. Duke snorted and went right back to chewing his hay. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. Tiffany wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The dust from Tiffany's tires hadn't even settled before my phone started buzzing. I didn't have to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Sure enough, before I could even get back to the house, the sheriff's familiar voice rang through the speaker. Got a lady over here claiming she was assaulted by a... Hold on. There was a shuffling noise, followed by a barely suppressed chuckle. By a mule. I sighed. Yep. Duke did what Duke does best. The sheriff snorted. She's demanding I come out there and take a report. Says she's pressing charges. Pressing charges for what? Trespassing. That's what I asked her, the sheriff said. But she says you allowed a vicious animal to attack an unsuspecting visitor. Said something about animal negligence and emotional trauma. Also, apparently she has a huge online following, and I should think carefully before I ignore her. I rubbed my forehead. Fine. Come on out. Bring popcorn. It wasn't long before I saw the sheriff's cruiser rolling down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. Tiffany's fancy SUV was parked right beside it, and there she was, pacing back and forth, phone in hand, talking in an exaggerated voice to someone, probably recording a dramatic retelling for her followers. The moment I walked over, she turned, eyes blazing. Oh, look who decided to show up. I hope you're ready for a lawsuit, because I am not letting this slide. The sheriff adjusted his belt and looked at her, then at me. All right, ma'am. Why don't you tell me exactly what happened? Tiffany tossed her hair, lifting her chin. I was simply trying to take some photos when this beast launched a full-scale attack on me. I was thrown to the ground, injured, humiliated, and this man, she jabbed a finger in my direction, is fully responsible. The sheriff turned to me, expression unreadable. That true? I crossed my arms. Not exactly. She trespassed, ignored multiple warnings, and got in Duke's face with her camera. Duke expressed his opinion in the most effective way he knows. The sheriff scratched his chin. And you got proof of that? Tiffany smirked, clearly expecting me to fumble for words. Unfortunately for her, I didn't need to. Sure do, I said, pulling out my phone. Security cameras caught the whole thing. Tiffany's smirk froze. I tapped the screen, and there it was, the crisp, high-definition footage of her strutting into my barn like she owned the place, ignoring every warning sign, and shoving her phone at Duke's unimpressed face. Then came the glorious moment when Duke delivered his legendary kick, sending her sprawling into the hay. The sheriff watched in silence, his lips twitching as he replayed the moment of impact. Then, after a long pause, he cleared his throat. Well, ma'am, from what I'm seeing here, looks like you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be, agitating an animal, and got a fair response. I'd say that's more on you than on the mule. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Are you serious right now? The sheriff shrugged. You trespassed, lady. That mule had every right to defend himself. If anything, you're the one looking at legal trouble. Tiffany's face went from red to white to an unhealthy shade of purple. This is insane. You're supposed to be on my side. This is animal assault. Negligence. Do you even know who I am? The sheriff sighed. Ma'am, I don't care who you are. What I do care about is the law. And from what I'm seeing, the only crime here is you ignoring private property signs and harassing a working farm animal. Tiffany let out a strangled noise. This isn't over, she seethed. I will be pressing charges. I will be posting about this. You're both going to regret this. The sheriff tipped his hat. You do what you got to do. Just know, if you keep harassing this man, you'll be looking at a trespassing charge real soon. Tiffany huffed, spinning on her heel and stomping back to her SUV. She yanked the door open, got in, and slammed it shut with enough force to make me wonder if she'd break her own window. A second later, the car roared to life, and she tore off, kicking up a cloud of dust in her wake. The sheriff let out a long whistle. I swear, some people just look for trouble. I chuckled. Oh, she's not done. People like her never let things go that easily. Sure enough, that night, I got a taste of just how far she was willing to take this. My phone started buzzing with notifications, dozens, then hundreds. Confused, I opened up one of the messages. Dude, you're famous. Some influencer lady is ranting about you. My stomach sank as I clicked the link. Tiffany had posted a dramatic, tear-filled video recounting her traumatic experience. According to her, she had been brutally assaulted by a violent, neglected, rabid mule while simply trying to take some innocent pictures. She claimed she had been thrown to the ground, left with serious injuries, and was now dealing with crippling PTSD from the attack. The worst part? Her followers believed her. Comments were flooding in. That's horrible. That farmer needs to be shut down. OMG, I am never supporting that place. File a lawsuit. That's animal abuse. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Great. Just what I needed. But before I could even think about damage control, something incredible happened. A local from the village, one who had seen the security footage, uploaded the real video. It spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the comments took a very different turn. LMAO, she got what she deserved. OMG, watch the mule's face before he kicks her. He's so done with her nonsense. Wait, she trespassed and tried to act like the victim? Nah, this is gold. Within hours, the tide had turned. People weren't mad at me anymore. They were laughing at her. Memes started circulating. Someone even edited Duke's kick to make it look like he sent Tiffany flying into outer space. And just like that, Tiffany's plan backfired spectacularly. The fallout from Tiffany's viral humiliation was both entertaining and exhausting. The internet had torn her to shreds, turning her into a walking meme overnight. The video of Duke sending her flying had been edited 100 different ways, slow-motion replays, dramatic music, even a version where someone added superhero sound effects, as if Duke had just landed the punch of the century. Every corner of social media was laughing at her, and the hashtag #MuleJustice started trending. But if there was one thing I had learned about entitled people, it was that they never knew when to quit. Instead of taking the hint and slinking away into obscurity, Tiffany doubled down. 2 days after the internet flipped on her, a man in a suit showed up at my front gate. At first, I thought maybe a news station had sent someone out to cover the story. But as soon as he introduced himself, I knew exactly what was coming. I'm here on behalf of my client, Miss Tiffany Hastings, he said in a clipped tone, adjusting his tie like he was about to lay down the law. She is prepared to move forward with legal action regarding the injuries sustained on your property. I almost laughed. Almost. So let me get this straight, I said, crossing my arms. She broke onto my property, harassed my mule, got exactly what was coming to her, and now she wants to sue me for it. The lawyer's face twitched, like even he wasn't fully convinced of the case he was trying to push. Miss Hastings maintains that your mule exhibited aggressive behavior, resulting in physical and emotional distress. Given the trauma she has suffered, she is prepared to seek damages in excess of $50,000. I let out a low whistle. $50,000, huh? That's an expensive lesson in minding your own business. He cleared his throat. If you would prefer to settle out of court, Miss Hastings is willing to negotiate for a lesser amount. I couldn't help but grin. Oh, don't you worry. I'll see her in court. The lawyer hesitated, like he hadn't expected that answer. Most people would have caved at the threat of a lawsuit. But I had two things Tiffany clearly didn't: common sense and evidence. A week later, I found myself in a small-town courtroom, watching as Tiffany dramatically dabbed at her eyes while recounting her trauma for the judge. "Your Honor, I still can't sleep at night," she sniffled. The fear, the sheer terror I felt when that beast attacked me. "Miss Hastings," the judge interrupted, adjusting his glasses, "according to security footage, you entered the defendant's property without permission, ignored clearly posted signs, and approached an animal despite warnings from the owner. Is that correct?" Tiffany's fake tears dried up immediately. "Well, I mean, yes, technically, but that doesn't excuse." "Did the defendant invite you onto his property?" the judge asked. She shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly, but I'm an influencer. I was just—" The judge held up a hand. "So you knowingly trespassed, ignored warnings, startled the animal, and are now attempting to claim damages for an injury that was entirely your fault." Tiffany's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The judge sighed and turned to me. "Do you have a counterclaim?" I nodded. "I'd like to file for trespassing damages and harassment." Her social media slander also led to temporary business losses until the truth came out. The judge didn't even hesitate. "Case dismissed. The plaintiff will pay the defendant's legal fees and damages for trespassing. This court is adjourned." Tiffany's jaw dropped. "Wait, that's not." But the judge had already stood up and left the courtroom. Outside, as I walked toward my truck, Tiffany stormed after me, face twisted in fury. "You ruined me," she shrieked. "Do you have any idea how many followers I lost over this? How much money I lost?" I turned, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like a you problem." She let out a frustrated screech and stomped off, disappearing into her SUV. I watched as she peeled out of the parking lot, probably off to find her next victim. The story might have ended there, but life has a funny way of delivering one last dose of karma. A few weeks later, I got a call from Old Man Jenkins. "You seen the news?" he cackled. "That city lady got caught trying to sneak into another farm. This time, she tried to pose with a bull." I nearly dropped my phone laughing. Apparently, Tiffany hadn't learned her lesson. She had gone to another farm, one with an even larger following than mine, thinking she could stage another perfect rustic photo. Only this time, instead of a patient mule, she had wandered into the pasture of a very territorial bull. The farmer, who had already heard about her antics from my case, had security cameras rolling. The footage of Tiffany running for her life, screaming as the bull chased her out of the pasture, went viral in minutes. The internet lost its mind. People who had felt bad for her before now saw the pattern. She wasn't just an innocent victim. She was a serial trespasser who had finally met her match. The memes exploded all over again. Hashtag Karen versus farm animals became a thing. Someone even made a compilation video of her getting kicked by Duke, then running from the bull, all set to cartoonish music. Her influencer career? Over. Her reputation? Destroyed. And me? Well, Duke became a local legend. Tourists started showing up at the farm just to see the mule that kicked Tiffany. People wanted pictures, merch, even Duke-themed souvenirs. I had no choice but to capitalize on it. I printed out t-shirts that said, "Respect the Mule," with an image of Duke looking unimpressed. They sold out within days. In the end, Tiffany's bad decisions made me more money than I ever could have imagined. My business thrived. Duke got extra apples from admiring visitors. And as for Tiffany? Well, she disappeared from social media entirely. Maybe she finally learned to stay out of places she didn't belong. Or maybe she just ran out of farms to trespass on. Either way, one thing was certain. Duke had delivered the greatest lesson of all. Life on the farm settled back into its usual rhythm after the Tiffany debacle. Duke, now a local celebrity, enjoyed the extra attention and apples from visitors who came to see the famous mule who kicked the influencer. I even started giving small tours of the farm, sharing the story of how Duke had defended his territory with a well-placed kick. It was good for business, and the extra income helped with some much-needed repairs around the property. But as the saying goes, just when you think things are calm, Life has a way of throwing you another curveball. It was a crisp autumn morning when I noticed a familiar black SUV slowly driving past the farm. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be her, could it? Tiffany had disappeared from social media after her humiliation, and I hadn't heard a peep from her in months. But there was no mistaking that car. It was the same one she had driven the day Duke sent her flying into the hay. I watched from the porch as the SUV paused near the barn, just like before. My heart raced. Was she back for round two? But then, to my surprise, the car kept going, disappearing down the road without stopping. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't her. But deep down, I knew better. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, and my stomach churned as I opened it. Inside was a formal notice. Tiffany Hastings was suing me again. This time, she was claiming emotional distress, defamation, and loss of income due to the viral harassment she had endured after the incident with Duke. I couldn't believe it. She was really doubling down. The letter demanded a settlement of $100,000, or she would take me to court. My hands shook as I read the words. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about pride. Tiffany wasn't going to let this go, no matter how many times she was humiliated. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Sam who had helped me with the first case. He listened carefully as I explained the situation. She's claiming defamation? Sam asked, sounding skeptical. On what grounds? She says the security footage I released ruined her reputation. I replied, pacing the kitchen. And that the memes and jokes online caused her emotional trauma. Sam chuckled. This is ridiculous. You didn't defame her. You just showed the truth. And as for the memes, that's not your fault. The internet does what the internet does. So what do? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and anxiety. We fight it, Sam said firmly. She's grasping at straws. But we need to be prepared. She's clearly not going to back down. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparations. Sam and I gathered all the evidence we could, security footage, witness statements, and even screenshots of Tiffany's own social media posts where she had admitted to trespassing. We were ready for battle. But Tiffany wasn't the only one who had been busy. Unbeknownst to me, she had been quietly building a new online persona. She had rebranded herself as a victim of rural injustice and had started a crowdfunding campaign to cover her legal fees. Her followers, many of whom had abandoned her after the first incident, were now rallying behind her, convinced that she had been wronged. The day of the trial arrived, and the small courtroom was packed. Reporters had caught wind of the story, and the case had gained national attention. It was no longer just about a mule and an influencer. It was a cultural clash between rural life and the digital age. Tiffany arrived dressed in a sleek, professional outfit, her hair perfectly styled. She looked every bit the part of the wronged victim. I, on the other hand, wore my usual farm attire, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt. I wasn't here to play games. I was here to defend my farm, my mule, and my way of life. The trial began, and Tiffany's lawyer laid out her case with dramatic flair. He painted me as a heartless farmer who had allowed a dangerous animal to roam free, endangering innocent visitors. He argued that the release of the security footage was a deliberate attempt to humiliate Tiffany and destroy her career. When it was our turn, Sam calmly presented the facts. He showed the court the no trespassing signs that Tiffany had ignored, the warnings I had given her, and the footage of her provoking Duke. He also called Old Man Jenkins to the stand, who testified that Tiffany had been warned multiple times to stay off the property. Your Honor, Sam said in his closing statement, this case is not about defamation or emotional distress. It's about personal responsibility. Miss Hastings knowingly trespassed on private property, ignored clear warnings, and provoked an animal. The consequences of her actions are her own doing. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fairness, took her time deliberating. The courtroom was silent as we waited for her verdict. Finally, she spoke. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that Miss Hastings knowingly trespassed on private property and provoked the animal in question. The release of the security footage was not an act of defamation, but a factual account of events. As for the emotional distress claim, the court finds that Miss Hastings' own actions were the primary cause of any distress she may have experienced. She paused, looking directly at Tiffany. This case is dismissed. Miss Hastings will pay the defendant's legal fees and is hereby ordered to cease all further attempts to harass or sue Mr. Thompson. This court is adjourned." The room erupted in murmurs as Tiffany's face turned bright red. She stood up, visibly shaking, and stormed out of the courtroom without a word. Outside, the reporters swarmed, but I had no interest in giving a statement. I just wanted to get back to the farm and put this whole mess behind me. As I walked to my truck, I noticed Tiffany standing by her car, her lawyer speaking to her in hushed tones. She looked up and caught my eye, her expression a mix of anger and defeat. I tipped my hat and gave her a small nod. "Better luck next time," I said, unable to resist a little jab. She glared at me but said nothing. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It was over. Finally. But life on the farm is never dull. A few weeks after the trial, I received a package in the mail. It was a book titled The Influencer's Guide to Rural Etiquette by Tiffany Hastings. Inside was a note. "Consider this a peace offering. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before releasing security footage." I couldn't help but laugh. Tiffany had turned her humiliation into a book, and from what I could tell, it was selling surprisingly well. She had even dedicated a chapter to Duke, calling him the mule who changed my life. I showed the book to Duke, who sniffed it disdainfully before going back to his hay. "Guess you're famous again, buddy," I said, scratching his ears. As for Tiffany, she eventually faded back into obscurity. Her book was a hit, but her influencer career never fully recovered. She did, however, manage to find a new niche as a rural lifestyle consultant, advising city folks on how to navigate life in the countryside without getting kicked by a mule. And me? Well, life on the farm went back to normal. Duke continued to be the star of the show, and I continued to tell his story to anyone who would listen. The whole ordeal had taught me one thing. No matter how much the world changes, some things, like a mule's kick, remain timeless. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.